Good morning.
Hello. How are you doing?
Doing great. How about yourself?
I'm okay.
It's good to see you.
It's good to be home for a while.
Yeah, you've been world traveler recently.
Yeah, and there's nothing I hate more than having to sit in an airport and wait. And I did a lot of it last week.
Oh man.
Hey, Miller.
Good morning.
Good morning.
How are you doing this morning?
Good. Honestly, well, we all tested negative
Oh, hooray.
on Friday.
Yay.
So that's a win. Rob and I apparently never caught it somehow.
Wow.
Yeah. Very pleased with that.
Absolutely.
And Kira's energy is very high, so she's fine. Right now she's dressed in an elephant costume.
She just shake it off. I thought about wearing my elephant costume, but I couldn't. I figured it would interfere with the.
Depends on the
awesome.
theme of the sermon.
That's true. It does.
I didn't realize you were a furry.
I'm always furry.
Hey, Rob.
Hi.
Good to see you guys.
You too.
So we're it today. Melissa's out of town and Tony's out of town. So if we can, I think we can hold down the fort. Let's see. Whoops. There we go. Can we do, I guess I will do the I'll do the liturgy, I guess, if Rob, if you don't mind being the voice of the people. And Miller and Paula, if y'all can do your usual scripture readings. Is that cool? All right. I'm going to go ahead and share up the screen then, and we can get started. Let's see. Here we go. On this day in 1597, the 27 martyrs were killed in Japan by the new government. This marked the beginning of the Kakure Kirishitan, or hidden Christians, of the Roman Catholic Church in Japan. They disguised icons of Mary as statues of a Buddhist figure named Guanyin, and disguised their Latin prayers as Buddhist chants. When the ban on Christianity was lifted in 1873, 30,000 Christians came out of hiding. Some rejoined the Roman Catholic Church, but others preferred their Buddhist Christian synthesis and became known as the Hanari Kirishitan, or separated Christians. The Lord be with you.
And also with you.
Hear these words of invitation.
The hospitality of God knows no bounds.
The love of God is immeasurable.
The generosity of God is beyond our wildest dreams.
We gather today as invited ones,
as beloved ones,
as blessed ones.
Draw near and let us break the bread of life.
Our responsive reading is from Psalm 112. Excuse me. Praise the Lord. Those who honor the Lord, who adore God's commandments, are truly happy.
Their descendants will be strong throughout the land.
The offspring of those who do right will be blessed. Wealth and riches will be in their houses.
Their righteousness stands forever.
They shine in the dark for others who do right. They are merciful, compassionate, and righteous.
Those who lend generously are good people, as are those who conduct their affairs with justice.
Yes, these sorts of people will never be shaken. The righteous will be remembered forever.
They won't be frightened at bad news. Their hearts are steady, trusting in the Lord.
Their hearts are firm. They aren't afraid. In the end, they will witness their enemies' defeat.
They give freely to those in need. Their righteousness stands forever. Their strength increases gloriously.
Isaiah 58, 1 through 9a. Shout loudly, don't hold back, raise your voice like a trumpet. Announce to my people their crime, to the house of Jacob their sins. They seek me day after day, desiring knowledge of my ways. Like a nation that acted righteously, they didn't abandon their God. They asked me for righteous judgments, wanting to be close to God. Why do we fast and you don't see? Why afflict ourselves and you don't notice? Yet on your fast day, you do whatever you want and oppress all your workers. You quarrel and brawl, and then you fast. You hit each other violently with your fist. You shouldn't fast as you are doing today if you want to make your voice heard on high. Is this the kind of fast I choose? A day of self-affliction, of bending one head like a reed, and of lying down in mourning, clothing, and ashes? Is this what you call a fast, a day acceptable to the Lord? Isn't this the fast I choose? Releasing wicked restraints, untying the ropes of a yoke, setting free the mistreated, and breaking every yoke. Isn't it sharing your bread with the hungry and bringing the homeless poor into your house, covering the naked when you see them and not hiding from your own family? Then your light will break out like the dawn and you will be healed quickly. Your own righteousness will walk before you, and the Lord's glory will be your rear guard. Then you will call, and the Lord will answer. You will cry for help, and God will say, I'm here.
Matthew 5:13-20. You are the salt of the earth, but if salt loses its saltiness, how will it become salty again? It's good for nothing except to be thrown away and trampled under people's feet. You are the light of the world, a city on top of a hill that can't be hidden. A city on top of a hill can't be hidden. Neither do people light a lamp and put it under a basket. Instead, they put it on top of a lampstand, and it shines on all who are in the house. In the same way, let your light shine before people, so they can see the good things you do and praise your Father who is in heaven. Don't even begin to think that I have come to do away with the law and the prophets. I haven't come to do away with them, but to fulfill them. I say to you very seriously that as long as heaven and earth exist, neither the smallest letter nor even the smallest stroke of a pen will be erased from the law until everything there becomes a reality. Therefore, whoever ignores one of the least of these commands and teaches others to do the same will be called the lowest in the kingdom of heaven. But whoever keeps these commands and teaches people to keep them will be called great in the kingdom of heaven. I say to you that unless your righteousness is greater than the righteousness of the legal experts and the Pharisees, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven. May God bless the hearing of this word.
Thanks be to God.
Toyohiko Kagawa was a labor activist, Christian reformer, and pacifist who lived from 1888 until 1960. He studied theology and genetics at Princeton and lived among the poor in Japan. He wrote a book called Brotherhood Economics and believed cooperatives could be a Christian alternative to capitalism and communism. He said, in the heart of the God of the universe, each child of his is as necessary to him as the fingers are to the hand. In the marvelous design of the universe, not even a sparrow can fall to earth meaninglessly. So we'll go into a time of prayer. I'll get us started, and those of you who are participating either on the Zoom call or if you're on Facebook or YouTube, if you would like to lift up a prayer request, just put it in the chat and we'll read it out as we pray together. Let's pray together. Gracious God of the universe, who appoints each of us to be like fingers on your hand, we are often going through life unaware that we are doing your work. Help us to understand that your work isn't just labor, it's also the work of enjoying the planet, of rejoicing, of celebrating. Help us to unite the work that we do with our hearts and minds with the work of our hands, so that our labor also becomes worship. The things we do in the world to shape it, to improve it, are not things that we do just to fulfill our own needs, but to fulfill your glory. We lift up to you all those who feel a lack of meaning and purpose in their lives. Those who see life only as suffering. We lift up to you those who are struggling, recognizing that all of our obstacles to seeing your glory are often things of our own making, things like poverty and war. We ask, God, for your kingdom to come, as we ask every week for your will to be done on earth as it is in heaven. And we recognize that this means, God, not just tedium and toil, but also celebration and wonder, exploration and discovery. Help us to make those possibilities for all people and all your creatures. And God, we lift up to you people and situations who are close to us, and I invite those of you who are listening to share.
My Aunt Doll.
Lord, hear our prayer. For Camille's mom as she handles her current struggles and for the wisdom to know how to help her. Lord, hear our prayer.
For Jackie Bolden.
Lord, hear our prayer.
For the family of Carol Ivy.
Lord, hear our prayer.
Gratitude for Kira's healing.
Lord, hear our prayer.
Comfort and healing for Ward Watson.
Lord, hear our prayer.
For the family of Mason Ayers and for Merle Ayers.
Lord, hear our prayer.
For Ted Davis.
Lord, hear our prayer.
For Amy Marie.
Lord, hear our prayer.
For Stanley Hurst.
Lord, hear our prayer.
For Cruz, who was life flighted to Cincinnati Children's yesterday to continue treatment for HLH.
Lord, hear our prayer.
For transgender children and adults.
Lord, hear our prayer.
For gratitude that signs of spring are already appearing.
Lord, hear our prayer.
For Tony and Melissa and their travels.
Lord, hear our prayer.
For the disabled who face obstacles to access each day.
Lord, hear our prayer.
For those who are having to deal with freezing temperatures.
Lord, hear our prayer.
Gracious God, for all those that we name and for those prayers that are unspoken, we give you thanks that you hear and that you answer, and that even when we don't know what to pray, that you pray with sighs too deep for words. We join the prayer that Jesus taught us, saying, Holy One, our Mother and Father, let your name be revered. Let your reign come. Let your will be done on earth as it is in the heavens. Give us today the bread we need for today, and forgive our sins as we forgive those who sin against us. Save us from the time of trial and deliver us from evil. For yours is the sovereignty, the power, and the glory, now and forever. Amen. So last week I started talking about one of my favorite parts of the Bible, the Sermon on the Mount, and I talked a little bit about how this particular passage, these 3 chapters, have had such a tremendous impact on the way that we think about Christianity. Now, I want to say that depending on how you read the Bible, you could read this as literally a message that Jesus came and delivered, that he went up a mountain and he spoke this to his disciples, or you can read this as kind of Matthew's distillation of Jesus's teaching into like the greatest hits. And a lot of scholars think that probably a lot of the sayings that we get from Jesus that are found both in Matthew and Luke are probably kind of like a compilation of Jesus's greatest hits, sayings that got written down. But Matthew has arranged them in such a way that there's really a flow to the Sermon on the Mount. And used to, when I would hear it, it just seemed like it was jumping from one topic to another. And it wasn't until much later that I really felt like it has a structure, and that when you start digging into the structure, you see a bigger message come out of it. And last week we talked about the Beatitudes. This is kind of Jesus's opening salvo, where he comes out messing with your expectations. And he's really trying to catch your attention. I really feel like this is the hook. The Beatitudes are Jesus saying, "Blessed are the poor in spirit," or as the Contemporary English Bible says, "Happy are the hopeless," right? And he just out of the gate, boom, and leaving you kind of reeling. What's he talking about? And he goes through the Beatitudes, talks about happy are the hopeless, happy are those who mourn, happy those who are hungry and thirsty for justice. And the picture that's conjured up in my mind are the people who are out there protesting, right? Being prophetic. And as Jesus begins to talk to his disciples, now it's his disciples who've gathered around him, as he started talking about happy are the hopeless, happy are those who mourn, happy are those who are persecuted, he finally turns around and says, and happy are y'all, and the word is y'all, when people persecute you for my sake. Rejoice because your reward is great in heaven. So after he delivers that opening salvo, boom, tying the happy are the hopeless to you, or to y'all, to the gathered disciples, he says this part. Actually, I'm going to go ahead and pull it up on the screen again because I think it's worth looking at. He says, y'all are the salt of the earth. But if salt loses its saltiness, how will it become salty again? It's good for nothing except to be thrown away and trampled under people's feet. Now, Luke's version of this goes even a little further. It says it's not even good for the manure pile because you don't want to put salt in your fertilizer, right? So you ain't worth poo. It's harsh language, right, in Luke. But here it's like, if you lose your saltiness, you ain't no good. Trampled under people's feet, right? The idea is this is something that's worthless. It's not, you don't even want to put it, you can't use it for anything. Now, people have talked about this line, and they've come up with a lot of different explanations. People have said that, the salt often was mixed with impurities and sand, and for salt to lose its saltiness sometimes meant that it would get moist. I don't know about y'all. My mom always put rice in the salt shakers to absorb the moisture so the salt wouldn't get clumpy, and but the idea is salt desiccates, it absorbs moisture, it disappears, it becomes not as good, and then stuff you're left with are the impurities. So okay, that sounds okay. I don't know that Jesus means it that literally. I think it's kind of the idea here is salt is a flavoring and a preservative. And for Jesus to say, y'all are the salt of the earth, the idea is not you're the whole earth, which I think oftentimes Christians hear, like you are the most important thing in the world, you Christians. I think here it's you are something meant to give flavor to the planet. God's going to love the planet whether Christians are on it or not. God's going to love the planet whether Christians exist or not, right? But the idea, disciples of Jesus are meant to give flavor to the planet. It's meant to make it more interesting, right? So it isn't, salt is not something that you eat as a main course. Salt is something you add to your meal. And this, in some ways, I think relativizes the whole idea of being a disciple of Jesus, which oftentimes Christians make the most important thing in the world. And I think part of what Jesus tells us is that being religious isn't the most important thing in the world. So I think part of this is, it's to say, you guys are really important, but you are not the main deal. And I think it becomes more clear as we go on. So I'm gonna roll down a little bit further. Y'all are the light of the world. A city on top of a hill can't be hidden. The idea is you're gonna shine. You're gonna be out there. Nobody lights a lamp, and remember, this is an oil lamp, and puts it under a bushel. So I always heard of this, hiding a light under a bushel is bad because then you don't have the light. It's in dark. But the thing about putting an oil lamp under anything is that it's also dangerous. In fact, Luke says no one lights an oil lamp and puts it under a mattress. Don't smoke in bed. This is kind of the idea here. But the idea is that the light is meant to give light to others in the house, right? It shows things up. Now, you can survive without a lamp, but a lamp makes things nicer. Again, I think it relativizes a lot of the way that Christians often make being Christian the most important thing you can do in your life, right? God's going to love you regardless of whether you are a follower of Jesus or not. But being a follower of Jesus brings flavor and light to the world. And I think this is part of what Jesus is pointing out. Y'all, the community of prophets, you're supposed to make the world better. It's not that God's not going to love the world if you're not in it, but you have a role to play. Okay. Rolling down a little bit further. He says, and I think this is kind of a counter, right? Don't even begin to think that I've come to do away with the law and prophets. Here's something important. Whenever someone says, don't think this, it means that people are thinking that, right? So Jesus says, don't think I've come to do away with the law and the prophets, means that a lot of people heard this first line and were thinking, oh, you're saying to get rid of the law and the prophets, right? Or in terms of being a disciple of Jesus, they were saying, oh, you're not following food regulations or you're not doing these other things. You're just abolishing the law and the prophets. Jesus says, no, don't think that. I think this is an important part of the Sermon on the Mount, okay? Because twice he's going to tell you, don't think this. He's going to make a statement and then come back, turn around and say, wait, no, don't go too far. This is not what I mean. So he says, don't think I'm getting rid of religion. Don't think I'm getting rid of the law and the prophets, of Judaism. He says, as long as heaven and earth exist, neither the smallest letter nor the smallest stroke of a letter will be erased from the law until everything there becomes a reality. The idea here is that his faith, his Jewish faith, is not just a list of regulations. It's that there's something it's bringing into existence in the world, right? So it isn't just, here's a list of things to do. There's a purpose for this. And I think this gets back to the idea of being salt and light, right? There's a purpose for what you're doing. It's supposed to bring something into reality. This is often translated as until not the smallest stroke of a pen will be erased until everything is fulfilled, right? But I think it means this stuff is becoming a reality. There's something in the world that this is birthing into existence. And then he finishes by saying, I say to you, unless your righteousness is greater than the righteousness, or your seeking justice is greater than the seeking justice of the legal experts and Pharisees, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven. So this last statement is a pretty harsh statement, or sounds pretty bold. You will never enter the kingdom of heaven unless your righteousness exceeds that of the most religious people you know. Okay? So taking all this together, Jesus says, y'all are prophets. That's the Beatitudes. You're going to have this kind of experience of the world. You're important because you bring flavor and light to the planet. Now, I'm not saying that religious rules don't matter. What I am saying is religious rules, the purpose of them is to bring something into existence in the world. And all of that's extremely important, and you're not going to be able to abandon it until it accomplishes its purpose. And you're not going to see that reality, right? You're not going to enter the kingdom of heaven unless your righteousness exceeds that of the Pharisees, of the religious people. So in other words, it's not that religion is baloney. It's that religion has a purpose and it's aimed towards something, right? And unless you are doing things differently than the current crop of very religious people, you're not going to see this result. Does that make sense? Okay. So the Sermon on the Mount, to me, is Jesus saying, my purpose for y'all is not to introduce a lot of different rules and a lot of different systems. Okay. It's to redirect you towards the purpose of what religion is really about, which is to bring about the reign of God, right? To create justice and order and a more harmonious existence on the planet. Okay, so that's how Jesus's sermon gets launched. Now, I want to set things up because in the next couple of weeks we're going to look at some of these other passages. Jesus has this way of talking in Matthew's gospel where he'll say something and he'll say, now don't take it this way, like you just heard. Don't think I've come to abolish the law and the prophets. Now, in a little while, he's going to go back on some of what he just said here, because he's going to say, what I don't mean by you being a light on the hill and by your righteousness exceeding that of the Pharisees, what I don't mean is that you should do a lot of good stuff so you can be seen by people. Because in the next chapter, he's going to say, when you give alms, don't sound a trumpet in front of you, but do it in secret. When you pray, don't make a big show of it, but do it in secret, right? So he's going to say, you're the light of the hill, and your righteousness is supposed to exceed that of the Pharisees, but I don't want you being a big religious hypocrite. I don't want you being all showy and like, oh, look at me, I'm the light of the world, I'm the salt of the earth, right? The idea is, I want you to do this in such a way that you are oriented towards the goal, which is the reign of God. Okay, so I know that's a lot of stuff. I think it's important to unpack it because oftentimes when we read the Sermon on the Mount, it just comes off as a lot of sayings. We picture like Jesus floating around and saying, blessed are the poor, or, you're the salt of the earth. Instead of the fact that he's making an argument. He's trying to make a statement about the way that disciples should live their lives. Okay, so I'm done talking for a minute. I would love to hear your feedback on this. Oh, speaking of Jesus floating, so my favorite action figure of Jesus actually has wheels, so he can glide. And oftentimes when I see the Sermon on the Mount, it's Jesus like this. He's like, this is. I love it that only his arms are posable, and it's really just a gesture. It's just to say, anyway. But this is the Jesus of the Sermon on the Mount. Okay. I mean, the way it's portrayed. All right.
Ironically, am I on?
Yeah, you're on.
Joanna, my youngest daughter's birthday was this week.
Mm-hmm.
And I've been gone out of town, and my stipulation to going to Santa Fe was I had to be home for Joanna's birthday, because we have a tradition where they pick their meal and I cook it for their birthday. And I got in the kitchen Friday morning, throwing things everywhere, cooking. And halfway through getting things ready, realized I didn't have a single grain of salt.
Oh, no.
And totally panicked. And it wasn't a time when I could go running to the grocery store and bring some back. So I called Joanna and said, please bring salt. And she got here and had forgot the salt. And I had this absolutely beautiful meal cooked with no flavoring to it whatsoever. Everything there to nourish your body, but you need that little kick of flavor. And I love that idea of the earth already having everything we need, that it's already good, and it's our job just to add a little bit of flavor to what's already there. That's beautiful.
Thank you for that. Yeah, it is. When you actually don't have salt, it helps you appreciate the metaphor, doesn't it?
Yes.
Go ahead, Rob.
So the struggle that I have is that I'm looking for what do you say to the excessively scrupulous, right? We've talked about that, cohort and where that comes from multiple times. But so for those who are, excessively scrupulous and really focused on rectitude, I mean, surely we've all heard this passage reached for many, many, many times. And, I can hear this sort of rebuttal sermon in my head that is one I've heard before, which is that in the ancient world, salt is for preserving food, and this whole thing turns into a big salvation metaphor of some type, right? And that, because we're talking about I think about all the times that I've heard people reach for this statement by Jesus about not abolishing the law and the prophets to say, and therefore progressives are not correct.
Right.
We need to talk about that today.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Give me the answers. Tomorrow, I'm meeting a cousin who has been my best friend for many years, who's now in North Carolina, and she's one of those scrupulous people. She's also one of the kindest, most loving people I've ever known. And, as far as giving alms to the poor and that type of thing, she's all into it. But she's also very offended by any curse word and, things like that. And she wants me to come tomorrow and explain what I believe to her. And I'm really afraid she's going to try and save me.
Oh, man.
But
yeah.
How do you deal with someone who is such a wonderful person who is still a scrupulous person like that? It's so much easier just to, rip the scrupulous apart and think that they've got it all wrong, but she's got so much of it right.
Sure. Absolutely. Absolutely.
Like, how can you not get salty? Sorry. I think this sort of goes right into Camille's question of, doesn't Christ saying that the law and the prophets are not to be abandoned feed those who have become literalists? Like, I don't know how to respond to that.
Yeah.
That is the part of the passage that bothered me.
Right.
Like what is he reaching back for?
Right. Well, so what he's going to go on to say is the next part that he illustrates is he starts off with anger. Right. He says, just because you don't murder people doesn't mean that you're okie dokie. If you have anger, or actually the illustration really is more like conflict. Like if you're not trying to make peace with someone who has something against you, then you're not doing right. You should before you come to worship, you should leave your gift at the altar and go and make peace with your brother or sister, and then come and offer your gift. So that's the next bit that he's going to talk about. Likewise, don't think you're better than other people just because you don't commit adultery. If you have if you treat other people as objects, if you covet them, then you're not really any better than someone who commits adultery. Now, again, those things also get used to feed scrupulosity, right? Oh, I had lustful thoughts, or oh, I thought a mean thought. But I don't think the idea here is to say, that you have to be the thought police. The idea is really to say, look, you're not any better than people who are in prison. And God have mercy, in the United States, how many people do we have in prison? And we're a carceral system, right? So we often think we're better than those who murder, or those who do obvious wrong. And part of what I think Jesus is doing here is saying, look, this is not just about not robbing banks. My analogy would be, a lot of Christians today feel like, well, we're good people because we don't rob banks, because we're not in prison. because we're not like insert that group over there, right? So the way that I read this, again, to respond to Camille's question and some of the other questions about how you deal with scrupulosity, is to say, the direction he's going is to say, this is about a condition of the heart. How are you transforming yourself to be a person who brings peace, a person who hungers and thirsts for justice, etc. Yeah, Rob.
Sorry, my train of thought. Oh man. Oh, I remember. One of the other things that I noticed people doing, sort of an interesting rhetorical move, interesting, is they take these references to the law in the Bible and sort of elide what that actually means or refers to, right? Because I've heard people defend our over incarceration using this very scripture because the law, right? Like they hear that word and it means the same thing everywhere and always. And somehow, like, Torah is equated with the code of the United States. And then you grab a verse like, well, the government authorities are put in place by God, and all right, the merry train to authoritarianism, right? Like that train leaves fast. People throw their bags on that train eagerly. And I'm if you haven't already repented of that, then like that whole system makes a lot of sense from the inside. Right. That seems to me to be the besetting challenge here, is like, I just think this entire reading that we're putting out there today is going to strike people, as implausible. Like it's just motivated reasoning. When the vision that they've maybe marinated in is, the autocracy freight train.
Sure. Yeah. And I think part of the difficulty is in translation. Torah, which we translate as law, we think of, as you said, we make this one-to-one connection between Torah and what our legislators in Alabama come up with. And for Jewish people, the law, the Torah, actually, if you read Torah, it's mostly not rules. Like there's some rules in Leviticus, but it's mostly story. It's mostly story about the patriarchs and this promise made and this story of deliverance. So when you think about from a Jewish perspective, what Torah means, it's really partially a story of deliverance. And oftentimes when they would discuss law, it meant something more like one of the words that gets translated in Greek is logos, a principle of reason, or an order that kind of underpins the universe, kind of like natural law, like the law of gravity. Sort of, if you do these stupid things, if you, like Wile E. Coyote, run off the cliff, you can expect the law of gravity to catch up with you. The idea is wisdom is part of a law. Wisdom expresses this natural order that God has come up with. But I think, Rob, I think you're right. I mean, part of that is, it gets translated, or it gets this one-to-one correspondence between what people read in the Hebrew Bible and what they interpret as being really divine law today, which is whatever the Alabama legislature says. And I think, kind of getting back into the understanding of Jewish law, is we debate this stuff, right? The law is not something settled in a code. It's, we bring it into the community and we argue about what it means. And that seems to be something completely lost in the move from Judaism to Christianity, where it's like, Rabbi Jonathan Miller loved to say that Christians read the Bible as God's last word, Jews read the Bible as God's first word. And so it's like it opens things up when you read it that way. So yeah, go ahead, Miller.
I don't know. Rob said my sound was kind of weird. Is it terrible?
I can hear you fine.
Yeah, it's
Okay.
a little better now than last time.
Okay, I'm not sure what happened. There are guys running lawn equipment in our yard.
Okay.
Anyway, so I mean, I do kind of like this as like sort of a response to the sort of anti-Semitic urge to say, well, you know, the new covenant, blah blah blah.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I mean, because God's like, I mean, Jesus was like, no, that stuff's still there. It's still important that I'm Jewish, you know.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But yeah. And then Teresa has a nice comment. I'm happy to share that.
Please do.
Yeah. Teresa says, there's a certain amount of realizing you can't change people's thoughts that is just practical and self-preserving. You can plant seeds, but even when people do change their minds, it doesn't happen overnight. There are family members who have told me that my unwillingness to argue biblical perspectives with them shows I don't love them, because if I did, I would argue with them and try to save them from their error, which shows me that the very framing of their scrupulosity makes it impossible for us to understand each other.
Mm-hmm.
We're operating from different starting places and definitions and understandings of what is good or comforting or true, which is okay to me, but horrifying and dismaying to them. There's a wall of sheer terror there that I have to understand is not my job to penetrate. I tend to tell people that I'll explain it once, but my beliefs are not up for debate, and I'm sorry that scares them, but maybe I'm just swine and they shouldn't cast their pearls before me.
Wow, that's fantastic. Thank you, Teresa. Yeah. Can I say also that's good boundary drawing, because I think oftentimes you know, one thing I don't want to do is just replicate the conservative evangelical idea that we have to convert people to win. I just think that's so toxic. I don't think that ultimately helps folks. I do think if, you know, someone's beliefs are actively causing harm, that it might be good to talk with them. But there's part of it's an understanding of what is it my capacity to do, right? And what am I going to use my time doing? And it's not going to be arguing against foolishness. But that's fantastic. Thank you, Teresa, for that perspective. Yeah.
By the way, count how many. Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I was just say pearls before swine also comes from the Sermon on the Mount. So that's awesome.
Good tie-in. I can't count the number of times that I've used you can't put ignorance to bed at night, or, you know, you don't have to put ignorance to bed at night. It might not be yours, but I'm hearing it from you.
Yeah, no, that came from a TV show. That was How to Get Away with Murder. I can't remember the lawyer who said, please allow me to disabuse you of the notion that it's my job to tuck ignorance into bed at night. And I'm just like, oh man, I'll write that down. Get a tattoo of that one. That's fantastic.
Very useful when people are wrong on the internet.
Oh man. Yeah. Well, I mean, and this, so that goes back to, so that particular one goes back to my favorite proverb, which is, I think it's Proverbs 24 or 27. I can't remember which one, but one, they're back to back. One is, do not argue with a fool according to their folly, or you will be a fool yourself. And the other is, argue with a fool according to their folly, or they will be wise in their own eyes. So in other words, and they're side by side. And I always feel like people who talk about, you know, Torah, or I mean, I guess that's wisdom literature, but people who talk about the law don't get that there's contradictory laws, right? And that part of the whole process is you sit down and you talk about that stuff. So that proverb is like, you know, you're damned if you do argue with foolishness. You're damned if you don't argue with foolishness. Either way, foolishness is just foolishness, right? So yes, you can't, there's not a good answer to it, whether you argue with it or you don't argue with it. Anyway.
I think those people probably did very poorly in English classes because they don't understand paradox and they don't understand metaphor. Mm-hmm. And you have to have some understanding of both of those, or you can really get screwed up with the Bible.
Totally.
It's almost like the Bible understood that there would be situations that would require one set of rules and situations that would require another set of rules. And you'd have to figure that out.
Right.
Actually pay attention.
Right. Well, and that there's a discernment that comes with being in community. Also, that it's not just, oh, I read this and therefore it's true, and I'm going to apply this irrespective of the context without consulting anybody, you know. So and I'll share one of the things that over the last several years, I've gotten more involved in working with people who have obsessive compulsive disorder. One of the things I'm doing as part of my internship is we do intensive outpatient work with people who have obsessive compulsive disorder, religious scrupulosity, oftentimes. And so people will have obsessive thoughts about the next section where Jesus talks about anger and lust, that oh my gosh, I have lustful thoughts, therefore I'm just as bad as an adulterer, and I'm trying to guard myself against having sexual thoughts, and which, by the way, you can't do. Like, if you try not to think of an elephant, you're going to think of an elephant. So if you try not to think of sex, well, that's tough, especially if you're like, you know, college age student or something like that. So people beat themselves up because they're not worthy. They can't stop thinking about sex as much as they're trying, which is a terrible thing to do. The only thing you can do to help that situation is to get them to think about sex, right? To get them to make a list of sexual words so that their anxiety comes down through exposure. And as their anxiety comes down, they don't think about it as much, or if they do, they can shrug it off, right? And so the thing that's so toxic about that happens with that next passage, which I believe is next week. So pardon me for borrowing from next week. The thing that's so toxic about that is that people will go around beating themselves up for having biological urges that God gave them. I mean, sometimes you can say, well, would you like to pray for God to take away your sexual desire? And most people would say, well, no, I just want to have it when I want to have it, right? And I don't want to think about it when I want to think about it. Well, tough. That's not the way it works. If that's the way it works, we would be extinct. You know, anyway, it's just insane that this, well, I'm sorry to say insane, because you can't deal with that according to this scrupulous perspective on Jesus's words, right? And I don't mind saying Jesus was wrong if Jesus says you should never have sexual thoughts. I don't think that's what the passage means. I think Jesus is connecting it to covetousness, not lust, which is the way it gets translated. But we can talk about that next week. But my point is, like, you can certainly take this stuff and make it horrible and life ruining. Even more, Jesus says, you know, if you call someone you fool, you're liable to judgment. Well, read Matthew chapter 23. Jesus calls the Pharisees fools. He calls them asps. So I guess Jesus is going to hell. You know, I mean, that's you have to be more righteous than Jesus to get into heaven, is the conclusion. Because Jesus called people fools and you can't call people fools. I mean, I'm sorry, I'm ranting now, but that's the kind of stuff that preachers preach, and then people who are vulnerable hear, and it causes them real suffering, and it pisses me off. Anyway, it makes me angry, which means I'm going to hell. I'm sorry, I ranted too much. Other people can talk now. Rob, why don't you say the chat, what you just put in the chat? I think that's good.
Oh, okay. Well, picking back up your salt point. Yeah, this is what I was thinking as you were talking. You know, your earlier illustration was all about how salt tastes nice, but we also, I think, all know that too much of it, in fact, does not taste nice.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes.
And
you can't drink seawater.
Yeah, there's an interesting implication there that maybe it's important that there's just enough of us, but not too many. Or that, you know, we are not excessively vigorous in our salty action.
A
No,
little bit of us goes a long way.
Yeah.
I think there's a lot of truth to that. Well, I mean, that's
Maybe
like
maybe we're not so much even like salt as like what is that that Indian spice, right? Um
Garam masala.
no, no, there's like a little, oh, I'll have to look
Oh,
it up.
yeah, cumin, curry. I don't know.
No. Yeah, give me a second. Go ahead.
Well, so I think that does get to this metaphor also. I mean, the idea of light. The idea of light is not that everything is on fire. You know, when you light an oil lamp, it gives light so you can see other things in the house. You don't light a lamp and then just stare at the lamp, right? You light a lamp so you can, you know, write or do needlework or whatever, you know, in the dark. You don't light a lamp so that you can just go, "Ooh, look at the light." Or you don't set everything on fire so that you can see better. That's a similar kind of thing, right?
And like salt, too much light is not a good thing either.
Yeah.
It can give me horrible headaches. It can damage your eyes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. We're
Yeah.
hard to live with as Christians, aren't
Oh
we?
my gosh. Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think also it kind of goes to the idea of where Jesus began talking about prophets, right? If disciples are supposed to be a community of prophets, the idea isn't that the whole world should be prophets. The idea is that, you know, prophets have a certain role, but that's not the only role there is in life. Someone's got to milk the cows, but well, I tell you
It's
what,
called hing.
I'm
It's
sorry.
called hing.
Hing.
The spice.
Oh,
Yes.
thank you.
And it's just, you just add a little bit because it's extremely potent.
Yes, you are the
There-
hing.
But people who swear by it say that, you know, you just you don't have the dish complete until you put that little bit of stuff in it. So
Y'all are the
and
hing
on
of
its
the
own,
earth.
it apparently smells terrible and all this sort of thing. So
Yeah. I like poetry, which I know is a real geeky thing.
Yes.
And I wish I had my hands on it. It would take a while to find it. There's a wonderful poem called Lot's Wife. And she's explaining why she turned back to look at Sodom and Gomorrah as it was destroyed. And she's talking about, well, Lot, you had the time to go up on spiritual highs with God, but I was changing the diapers on the children, and I was cooking dinner, and I was out washing clothes and talking to my neighbors. And that's why I turned around and looked at the city, is because I loved it. And I forgot where I was going with this, but yeah, I think it's a beautiful contrast between being so spiritual that you can't see there's a life to be lived too.
I think I know the poem you're talking about. It seems like I may have seen it at some point as well. Right. I mean, because that's another one of those passages where when you read it, you're like, why on earth would you punish someone for having a heart? You know, anyway. Well, I appreciate the conversation today. Let's go ahead and move toward wrapping it up for the day. There's a lot more to talk about, and I suspect that as we go through the Sermon on the Mount, we'll talk about some more. I'll try not to rant so much next time, because I feel like I've got plenty to talk about next week. I will begin our closing prayer, and then Rob, if you'll do the benediction for us. Lord, I see clearly that any affliction which I have ever had is scarcely as one drop in the vast ocean of all the seas when compared with the tenderness of your divine heart towards those whom I love. Therefore, I cannot even by one thought wish anything other than that which your almighty wisdom has appointed for each of them. Lord, bless your special friends and mine according to the good pleasure of your divine goodness. Amen.
Beautiful.
God is love. Nothing is wasted. All things shall be well. Go in peace.
All right. Thank you all for joining me today. It's good to see you. So those of you in Birmingham, we are having a seed blessing this upcoming Friday. So if you're able to come, would love to see you. That's in the email that we sent out that's got the worship link in it. If you want to click through, you can find the details on that. Those of you on Zoom, stick around for just a minute. I'm going to end the live stream.